of these things. In the name of the risen Christ, amen.
Amen.
This week in Texas, we met a couple in their 70s who told me a really surprising story about something they'd just done. They're both very healthy, but they decided, so that their adult children wouldn't be bothered by it, that they should get their affairs in order so that when they die, everything will be planned ahead. So they went to the cemetery where her family had been buried for some 3 generations now. They bought the plots that they wanted side by side in the graveyard. They even put up the headstones, with each of their names and the years of their birth. And then, and here's the kicker, they lay down on the ground in front of those headstones. He grabbed a bunch of violets and put them right here and persuaded one of the kids to take their picture, which they posted on Facebook. They said they got incredible reaction to that. He said some of the people who saw it thought it was delightful, and others were, as only a Southern lady can say it, appalled. They were appalled. The disciples were appalled. They were shaken up by the stories they kept hearing about Jesus appearing to them after the crucifixion. And the story that Father Sandy just read from Luke, you notice maybe that it said verse 36b. I can't stand it when they do that. Don't you want to know what 36a was? 36a would have been the link to let you know that when Jesus appeared and they were so startled, they had just been talking about him. They had just been talking about him. And right before that, the reason they were talking about it is that the story of the road to Emmaus had just happened. Now, I'll refresh your memories about this. Evening of that first Easter day, 2 of Jesus' disciples, maybe a husband and wife, had been walking away from Jerusalem, away from everything that had happened, toward a village called Emmaus. And while they were walking, Jesus himself fell in step with him as it's coming back. Now you remember this, right? He falls in step with them. He hears them talking. He explains everything to them. They invite him into dinner. And then when he breaks the bread, they realize it's Jesus. And he disappears. That's what they were talking about. They came back. Those 2 came back to the other disciples to say, oh my God, we just saw him. We talked to him. He was there, then he wasn't there. And as they were talking about him, boom, right there with them again. It makes me wish I was in the movies, because the scene has been built up so beautifully that Christ should appear just as they were talking about him. So that's where we are. And the disciples' first reaction is sheer terror. Why? Because they think it's a ghost. First, they think it's a ghost, so Jesus says, no, ghosts don't have flesh and bones. Touch me. You can touch me, it's all right. Little different from John, which we heard on Easter Day when Mary was trying to touch him, and Jesus said, no, don't touch me. Get a little contradiction going on here. Then he says, give me something to eat, because just in case they thought he was an angel. In those days, when people talked about angels, much more than we do, they believed that angels didn't have to eat, or maybe couldn't, so he took a piece of fish. Once while eating out with the kids in a restaurant down at Disney World, the waiter told me that the fish that Jesus ate was tilapia. No kidding, you can't make this up. Because tilefish, tilapia, is actually a very ancient species. Isn't it interesting about that bit of fish? Jesus has fish in the Gospel of John in the resurrection appearances. We'll get to that one a little bit further on. But in that story, he prepares the fish and feeds it to them. So in John, he's don't touch me, he's not eating. In Luke, he's touch me, I'm eating. He lets Thomas touch him, but not Mary. Are you getting the feeling that there's some slightly contradictory versions of this story? Because different people were having different experiences. And different people were seeing or hearing or touching Jesus in different ways. I think the trouble you and I get into in our 21st century mind, and this has been going on for a while, is we hear these stories and right away we want to treat it as a true-false question, right? You know what a true-false question is. On a test, you got a 50% chance of getting it right either way, right? It's either one or the other. It's either true or it's false. Can't be anything in between. Now, if it's a multiple choice question, you think you're supposed to check off one, right? And the others are all wrong. But what about one of those multiple choice questions where it says, check all that apply? Those always make me feel a little funny in my stomach. It's like, you mean I could get 2 of them right and 3 of them wrong? Check all that apply. The resurrection of Jesus is not a true-false question. There are different accounts. As a friend said to me after the 8 o'clock, he's the same but different. So that he's the same but he's different, which means sometimes he appears and people don't know that it's Jesus. Sometimes they have to hear his voice before they know. Sometimes they have to touch him. Sometimes he has to call them by name. It's different at different times. It's different for different people. It's different in different places. It's almost like the thing that sometimes a yoga teacher will say at the beginning of the class. What does your body need today? What does your body need today? Because it's different every day. And the way that you hear Jesus today is going to be the same but different. It won't be the same as what you experienced last time. And it won't be the same as what the person next to you is experiencing. And at the same time, it will be. Jesus is one size fits all, and Jesus is the one that fits perfectly every time. So we work with these stories. It's comforting to know that there was confusion and doubt and fear about this from the very beginning. My Common English Bible commentary tells me, in fact, that this story about the eating of the fish and the touching of the body was there because already people were confused about whether Jesus appeared in a real physical body or not. They weren't sure about it then. Why do we expect ourselves to be sure in that factual way now? Because it's not that kind of question. Somehow, the stories kept coming in. That he fell in step with the disciples who were walking along in Emmaus. That he turned up on the side of the lake when some of them were out fishing. That he appeared instantly inside a room without walking through a door. Always saying, don't be afraid, but also saying, why are you frightened? What we need to know is not just what happened, but why. And what difference does it make? If the risen Christ was to be palpably present to you this very day in this very room, what difference would it make to you? The way I'm thinking about it lately is it's to give us courage. Because the one thing that all these stories say is that Jesus survived. Somehow, Jesus died and he survived it. He got through it. He's back. He's the same but different. He is there as a living testimony that, as we like to say, for Christians, life is changed not ended. He's changed, but he's here. He's changed, and he's here, and risen. And because he's here, we don't have to be so afraid of what happens next. We can understand that the death of the body is not the worst thing that ever happens to us. And the death of a husband may be the hardest, but not the worst, which is not to say that worse is to come, but that there is another life. There is another life running concurrently with this one, the life of the soul that keeps on running, that keeps on flowing, that keeps on giving. And that life has already begun in us. That life, that living stream is already there. It's already there. We need the faculty of faith to see it, to sense it, to work with it, and Lord knows we need practice. These stories are about contact with the living Christ. They are about contact. They're not necessarily at all about thinking it through. This week, a famous man died, Herb Trimpe. I always wonder if I'm pronouncing his name right. Trimpe. Those of you who are comic book or superhero fans, he's the man who gave us the Incredible Hulk. Can you picture it? Maybe you went to see the movie, you've seen the drawings. What you may not have known about Herb Trimpe is that late in his life, he became an Episcopal deacon, just like Dorothy, just like Bill Cassano. He kept his cartooning work going, but he became a deacon in the Episcopal Church in our diocese and was most known and remembered, I think, for his work at Ground Zero. He went down to Ground Zero to pray with people while the search for remains was going on, to counsel people, to pray with people, just to be there. And he wrote about that experience, about a time when one day, as he saw that they were moving the remains out and beginning a transporting, he stood there and began on his own to pray, that the words of the 23rd Psalm came to him. We know it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. But the line that captured his attention was, lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And he commented on how this piece of writing that was 5,000 years old was giving him such comfort in that moment. And he said, you know, this is all right brain activity. You know what he means by right brain? He said it's not analyzing, it's not about looking for the facts. It's just about knowing. Lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Where will you look for the risen Christ today? Will you listen for him as the first birds sing out early in the morning when the sun is just about to come above the horizon? Will you see him in the tenderness of freshly sprung blades of grass, or in those exquisite little white blossoms that start to appear on the pear trees and on the cherry trees? Will you feel him in a cool breeze? Will you watch for him in the faces of those who approach you, whether in love or in fear? Will you be reminded that however painful this life is, however challenging, however stressful, however joyful, he has lived through it all, has survived it all, and will be with you no matter what. He appeared to the disciples and helped them to understand everything. But they could only understand once they had accepted that it was really he who stood before them. God, help us open our eyes, our ears, our hearts. Make us wise. Help us to summon the faculty that our ancestors had when they were able to see and feel and taste and touch and know that you're really real, that it's really you, that it is true. Fact check or no. Open our hearts, our eyes, our minds. Come risen.